What does it take to make 16 women choose certain, agonizing death over another day of life? The answer lies in the gilded corridors of the Forbidden City, where in 1542 AD, a group of palace women moved like shadows through Emperor Jiajing's bedchamber. Their bare feet made no sound on the cold marble as they surrounded his sleeping form. One girl, no more than 14, trembled as she pulled a silk curtain cord tighter around the emperor's throat. Her hands shook not from weakness, but from the terrifying knowledge that this moment meant freedom or a fate worse than death. In the Imperial Harem, there was no in-between. The ribbon caught, their knot was wrong. The emperor stirred, and in the brutal aftermath, these women would face execution by 1,000 cuts. But on that night, they dared to fight back against a system that treated them as livestock. This was not an isolated act of madness, but the desperate, inevitable result of a machine built for one purpose: the absolute control of women. Picture walking through the red walls and golden roofs of the Forbidden City today. Tourists see beauty, majesty, and architectural wonder. They do not see the ghosts of the thousands of women who lived and died within these walls, never again to see their families, never to choose their own destiny. For over 2,000 years, Chinese emperors maintained harems that could house staggering numbers of women, up to 20,000, at a single time during the reigns of Emperor Huan and Emperor Ling. These were not simply palaces of pleasure, they were carefully orchestrated prisons of silk and stone. The architecture itself was designed for containment. All females living in the Forbidden City were carefully sequestered in the imperial quarters deep inside the palace, restricted to the inner court and forbidden from venturing out of the northern section. They existed in a complex hierarchy that could elevate or destroy them based on the emperor's whims, a pyramid of power with the empress at its apex and countless anonymous women at its base. The journey into this gilded cage began with a ruthless selection process that swept through the empire like a silent plague. In the Ming dynasty, for example, no household was exempt. Every 3 years, officials would search for girls between the ages of 14 and 16, judging them not merely on beauty, but on bloodline, virtues, behavior, and character. Imagine being one of those chosen girls, torn from everything familiar at 14 years old. You've never traveled more than a few miles from your village, never seen buildings taller than 2 stories. Now you're walking through gates large enough for armies, down corridors that stretch longer than your entire hometown. The air smells different here, a mix of incense, fear, and the metallic scent of power. You hear the rustling of thousands of silk robes, whispered conversations in unfamiliar dialects, and the sound of crying that someone is trying very hard to muffle. You are disappearing, your old self erased before you even reach your new cell. Within this prison, control was maintained through a combination of physical restriction and psychological terror. The most poignant symbols of this control were the eunuchs. To ensure that any child born in the harem was fathered by the emperor, males were not allowed to serve the women. The only exceptions were the eunuchs, men who had been rendered impotent through a brutal and often fatal castration process. During the Ming dynasty, a staggering 100,000 eunuchs served the emperor and his harem. These were not willing servants. Boys as young as 8 were forcibly taken from their families and held down while a knife removed not only their penis but also their scrotum. The survival rate was less than 60%. Those who lived faced a lifetime of physical problems, including chronic incontinence, social ostracism, and profound psychological trauma. They were neither fully male nor female in a society that recognized only those 2 categories, belonging nowhere except in the service of the system that had destroyed their bodies to ensure their loyalty. They became the omnipresent guards, the silent watchers, wielding great power within the palace as both overseers and fellow victims. Even the most intimate moments of a concubine's life were bureaucratized, stripped of all privacy and humanity. The rotation of concubines sleeping with the emperor was kept to a regimented order, recorded by secretaries with brushes dipped in imperial vermilion ink. Concubines were required to bathe and be examined by a court doctor before the emperor visited their bedchamber. Imagine being reduced to an entry in an official record, your most private moments catalogued by men with brushes and ink. The daily reality was one of constant surveillance. Naturally, concubines were strictly forbidden from having sex with anyone other than the emperor, and most of their activities were overseen and monitored by the eunuchs. It was a widely held belief that organizing the emperor's sex life was essential to maintaining the well-being of the entire Chinese empire. The Chinese calendars of the 10th century were not merely for tracking time, but for meticulously managing the emperor's sexual schedule, turning human intimacy into a state function. Perhaps the most insidious tool of control began long before a girl even entered the palace walls: the barbaric practice of foot binding. Since this practice was prominent at this time, The hobbled women could not run away or even walk into the emperor's bedchambers unaided. Instead, they had to be carried naked to the expectant man. Foot binding involved breaking the bones in a girl's feet, often as young as 4 years old, and folding them under to create the desired lotus bud shape. Mothers would wrap their daughters' feet so tightly that the blood supply was cut off, causing the toes to rot and fall off. The smell of rotting flesh was considered a sign that the binding was working properly. Listen to the sound of small bones snapping. Picture a mother holding down her screaming 4-year-old daughter, her love now intertwined with torture. This was not merely about beauty, it was about absolute control. A woman with bound feet couldn't walk more than a few steps without severe pain. She couldn't run, couldn't defend herself, couldn't escape. In the harem, this physical helplessness became the final, unbreakable lock on the door of her gilded cage. She was rendered permanently dependent, a beautiful, broken object in a palace full of them. If the Forbidden City was a gilded cage, then Emperor Jiajing was its most sadistic warden. His reign from 1521 to 1567 AD plunged the Imperial Harem into a new dimension of horror, transforming it from a prison of confinement into a laboratory of bodily exploitation. His obsession was not merely pleasure, but immortality, and he believed the key ingredient for his elixir of eternal life was the menstrual blood of female virgins. This conviction led to one of the most grotesque chapters in the history of the harem, where young girls were reduced to human crops, farmed for their most intimate biological functions. The systematic cruelty they endured would ultimately forge the desperation that fueled the bloody Renyan plot, a night when 16 palace women decided that murdering an emperor was a risk worth taking. Jiajing's search for immortality involved collecting the menstrual blood of virgins to make a substance called red lead, which he consumed in the belief it would prolong his life. To ensure the purity of this vile concoction, he kept girls around the age of 13 and fed them a starvation diet of only mulberry leaves and rainwater. Imagine rows of adolescent girls, their bodies just beginning to develop, locked away in chambers and fed like laboratory animals. Their diet was deliberately insufficient, designed to keep them weak, compliant, and, in the emperor's twisted logic, pure. Any of the girls who became sick from the cold or malnutrition were not treated with compassion but were beaten or simply discarded. Their daily lives were a relentless cycle of deprivation and fear, waking early to collect dew from the garden's banana trees for the emperor to drink another of his preferred methods for longevity. They were children tasked with sustaining the life of a man who viewed theirs as utterly disposable. The collection process itself was a mechanized horror. Each month during their menstrual cycles, these girls were subjected to examinations by eunuchs and court physicians. Their natural bodily functions were harvested as if they were livestock being milked. The girls who produced the most blood might receive slightly better treatment, a cruel incentive in a system designed to break them. Those whose cycles were irregular or deemed insufficient faced beatings or were thrown out of the palace, which often meant being cast into a society where they had no place and no survival skills. The emperor's obsession only deepened with time. A few years into this practice, in 1552, he lowered the age of acquisition, bringing in 200 girls as young as 8 years old. 3 years later, in 1555, he imported an additional 150 girls under the age of 8. These were children who should have been playing with dolls, now imprisoned as the emperor literally waited for their bodies to reach puberty so he could begin harvesting their blood. Guards monitored these little girls for the first signs of physical development, preparing them for a future of systematic bleeding. What made this entire enterprise even more grotesque was Emperor Jiajing's complete withdrawal from the responsibilities of governing. Following the earlier attempt on his life, the emperor retreated to the western part of the Forbidden City, living in isolation and ceasing to hold court for the next 2 decades of his reign. While his empire faced famines, invasions, and administrative decay, Jiajing focused entirely on his delusional pursuit of eternal life, feeding on the blood of children. The imperial court, and by extension the entire nation, was held hostage to one man's paranoid fantasy, its resources diverted to maintain a system of horror within the palace walls. It was within this cauldron of sustained atrocity that the Renyan plot of 1542 was born. The desperation of the palace women finally reached its boiling point. Picture these women in the emperor's bedchamber on that fateful night. They had chosen a moment when the emperor was sleeping in the chambers of his favorite concubine, Consort Duan. After she withdrew with her attendants, the emperor was left alone, and the 16 women saw their opportunity. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe months, communicating through glances and coded conversations about silk and poetry that actually concerned murder and freedom. They practiced tying knots in darkness, tested the strength of curtain cords, and assigned roles who would hold the emperor down and who would pull the noose tight. They knew that discovery meant not just their own deaths, but the utter annihilation of their families. Yet, they proceeded. The women moved in, holding down the emperor, while one of them tried to strangle him with a ribbon from her own hair. When this failed, they used a silk curtain cord, tying it around his neck. But in their inexperience and panic, they tied the wrong kind of knot, a fatal error that prevented them from tightening the noose to finish the job. Imagine that moment of frantic struggle. 16 women, some barely out of childhood, surrounding the most powerful man in their world. Their hands shook. One girl cried silently as she held down the emperor's arm. The woman with the ribbon, perhaps a keepsake from her mother and the last link to her home, was now using it in a desperate attempt to strangle her captor. Their failure was as swift as it was brutal. One of the conspirators, seized by panic, reported the assassination attempt to Empress Fang. With the emperor unconscious until the next afternoon, Empress Fang took matters into her own hands. Her judgment was swift and merciless. She ordered the 16 palace women to be executed by slow slicing, known also as death by 1,000 cuts. This punishment was designed to maximize suffering. Some records from the Ming dynasty suggest the process could involve up to 3,000 incisions over 3 days, with executioners trained to keep the victims conscious and alive for as long as possible. Sometimes the flesh of the victims was even sold as medicine. Picture these women being dragged to the execution ground. The youngest might have been 15, a life that had never known freedom, now ending in unimaginable agony. But the system's vengeance did not stop with them. Empress Fang also ordered 10 of their family members beheaded and 20 others enslaved. Mothers and fathers who had already lost their daughters to the Imperial Harem now lost their lives and their freedom because their daughters had dared to fight back. The message was clear. Resistance would be met with total, generational annihilation. The emperor's response to the attempt on his life was not introspection, but a tightening of restrictions and the acquisition of 300 new girls. The machine, having crushed its challengers, simply demanded more fuel. The most insidious aspect of the imperial harem system was its ability to corrupt its victims, transforming the oppressed into the most ruthless oppressors. No story illustrates this tragic cycle more clearly than that of Empress Dowager Cixi, a woman who began her life in the Forbidden City as a powerless concubine and clawed her way to the pinnacle of power, only to perpetuate the very horrors that had once confined her. Her reign stands in stark contrast to the brief, tragic life of Consort Zhen, a woman who tried to maintain her humanity within the system and paid for it with her life. These two figures represent the impossible choices faced by women in the harem: to become a monster and survive, or to remain human and be destroyed. Their stories, and the ultimate fall of the dynasty, reveal the lasting legacy of a system that taught women that compassion was a fatal weakness. Empress Dowager Cixi's journey to power began under the humblest of circumstances. She entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine of the 5th rank, given the name Lan, meaning orchid. Her life was one of anonymity until 1855, when she achieved the one thing that could elevate a concubine. She gave birth to the Xianfeng Emperor's only surviving son. This biological accident transformed her from a prisoner to a power broker. When her husband died in 1861, Cixi saw her opportunity. Believing the regents had poorly advised the emperor, she orchestrated a brilliant and ruthless coup with Empress Consort Zhen. They successfully overthrew the regents, imprisoning 5, executing 1, and ordering 2 to commit suicide. This was the moment of her transformation. The victim of the system had mastered its cruelties and now turned them outward to control an empire. For the next 47 years, she would be the de facto ruler of China. Cixi's rule was characterized by the same paranoia and brutality she had learned in the harem. This was chillingly evident in her relationship with her own family. When her son, the Tongzi Emperor, married a woman named Alut, Cixi grew intensely jealous of their happy marriage. She spied on the young couple through eunuchs and constantly interfered. The situation reached its horrific climax when Alut gave birth to a son, Cixi's own grandson. Seeing the infant as a direct threat to her power, as he would eventually require a regency that might exclude her, Cixi ordered the baby killed. Not long after, the Tongzi Emperor died of smallpox, and his wife, Alut, consumed by grief, committed suicide by swallowing opium. Dark rumors swirled that Cixi might have been responsible for their deaths as well, a woman so consumed by the system that she would destroy her own bloodline to maintain control. This pattern of cruelty found its final victim in Consort Zhen, a concubine of the penultimate emperor, Guangxu. Unlike the traditional and conservative women of the court, Consort Zhen was bubbly, free-spirited, and deeply curious about Western cultures and technology. Her effervescent personality captured the emperor's sole affection, and she often encouraged his well-meaning intentions to reform China's ailing systems. But in the harem, being loved by the emperor was as dangerous as being ignored. Her influence and modern ideas made her a target for the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi, who saw her as a direct challenge. In 1894, Cixi degraded consort Zhen, citing intervention in political affairs, and according to some reports, had her flogged a brutal and humiliating punishment. The end came in 1900 during the chaos of the Boxer Rebellion, as foreign armies occupied Beijing and the imperial court fled the city. Cixi made a final, brutal decision about the young concubine. She ordered consort Zhen to be brought before her, and, with the language of false mercy, told her, "I originally planned to bring you along with us, but you are young and pretty, and are likely to be raped by the foreign soldiers on the way. I trust you know what you should do." She was ordering Zhen to commit suicide. When consort Zhen refused and instead begged that the emperor be allowed to stay and negotiate with the foreign powers, Cixi's fury was unleashed. She immediately ordered consort Zhen to be thrown into a small well behind the Ningxia palace. Picture that final moment. A 4-year-old woman, full of life and ideas, being forced into a narrow, dark well, drowning in complete darkness while the court fled to save themselves. Her body wasn't recovered until a year later. The well remains in the Forbidden City today, a silent testament to her murder. The fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 finally ended the imperial harem system, but its psychological legacy persisted. The last emperor, Pu Yi, was just a child, and his adoptive mothers, the surviving concubines of previous emperors, continued the old patterns of judgment and competition in miniature, arguing over who should be his empress, based on beauty and family background. They had been so thoroughly shaped by the system that they could not escape its logic, even after its collapse. Today, this history of systematic horror has been largely romanticized. Emperors' concubines and harems are emphasized in 21st century novels and lavish television dramas written for female audiences, focusing on gorgeous costumes and passionate intrigue while ignoring the foot-binding, the blood harvesting, and the drownings in wells. When we focus on the occasional woman who gained power, like Cixi, we ignore the millions who suffered and died in silence. The historical records, written by men, minimized their suffering. The courage of the 16 women who tried to strangle Emperor Jiajing and of consort Zhen, who spoke truth to power, deserves to be remembered not as romantic fantasy, but as a testament to human dignity in the face of absolute oppression. Their resistance lives on in our refusal to forget, in our insistence on telling the truth about their suffering. The empire that enslaved them is gone, but their stories are finally free, echoing from the red walls of the Forbidden City as a permanent reminder of the courage it takes to fight back. Thank you for watching this journey into the hidden history of the Forbidden City. If you found these stories of courage and survival compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more content that uncovers the forgotten truths of our past. We are connected across time by our shared curiosity, and your engagement helps ensure these stories are not lost to history.